I'm going to share my screen and introduce my guest now. So let me bring up her slide so I can introduce her properly. We're going to be joined in just a second by Jessica Woolbright. Jessica is the executive director of St. Martha's Hall. And if you need help, there is a number here, 314-533-1313. That can be reached. And I want to thank Jessica for coming. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about what you do. I want to remind people that a lot of people in my neighborhood, in Oak Tree Farm and nearby, we did a couple of Knit for Love endeavors, and we provided hats and mittens, and some were knitted. I knitted a few things and crocheted, and some were store bought. But we did a couple of charity drives 2 years in a row to try to get some gifts to your folks in the winter. Yeah. And it's just so great to be able to give back. And I know that at that number and on your website, you have a way to contribute to support your efforts. And I do hope that people will do that. And
thank you.
Yes, supporting our partners in our community is really important, and helping people out when they need help. Yesterday we heard from Maggie Menifee from Alive about sort of the shelter system, and I was hoping you would share with us the trajectory of a woman's experience or a family's experience before they dial that number and contact your organization.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me. Yes, the hats and gloves, especially the cute handmade ones, are always much appreciated. So thank you, and for everybody else who contributed to that. St. Martha's is part of that St. Louis area shelter system. We are a confidential location. Women find out about us lots of different ways. It might be events like this. We do a lot of community education. It might be from a detective or a social worker at a hospital. I think our largest referral source is really word of mouth. So friends, sisters, moms, cousins who have either benefited from our services or who know about us in some way and make that referral. Unfortunately, we in shelter are only seeing a small percentage of the women and children who are experiencing violence in their homes every day. The majority of the women we will never see in shelter. They may reach out to an attorney, they may reach out for counseling services. So I am glad that we are there to help the women that we can. There could never be enough shelters to truly offer space for everybody that needs it.
Do you have any numbers of how many women in the area are domestic violence victims, or how many come into this shelter system?
Yeah, so at St. Martha's, we serve approximately 100 women and 150 children a year. I have posted on our website page and tagged you on it, so anyone who goes to your Facebook page will be able to see it, that offers statewide statistics on not just how many people are served, but how many people are also turned away, or maybe are never looking for shelter, but receive services through other community partners. So those legal resources, counseling resources, because there's other ways to support women and children besides coming into shelter.
So, and what are some of those? I know we're going to talk about, well, let's go back to the trajectory of the woman's experience. Sure. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So, most of the time when women think about domestic violence, or when anybody thinks about domestic violence, they are thinking of the physical violence. So they think of the black eyes or the broken nose, or sort of what I like to call that Lifetime movie version of the battered woman. Unfortunately, there are a lot of other tactics that somebody who chooses to use violence may use without ever using physical violence, or only use physical violence when they feel like it's the only way to maintain that power and control over another person. So for most women, the physical violence is not the first sign, is not the first red flag. So she's going to talk about things like isolation, where her and her children are not allowed to leave the house or have to submit a very detailed plan on where they're going and who they're seeing. You can imagine that in today's circumstances, how everything that we're having to do in hopes of protecting ourselves and social distancing and social isolating is an especially dangerous factor for women living in violent homes right now, because they're being forced to isolate with somebody who is using violence or other forms of abuse to abuse her. Emotional abuse is another really powerful tactic. And I think it's so powerful because it's, one, coming from somebody that we love, somebody who is supposed to love and care about us more than anybody else. And those people that we're closest to also know our vulnerabilities. So they know exactly what to say to have the greatest impact. So those are examples of things that the women and children might be living through before the physical violence ever starts, or before they even recognize it as a pattern of abusive and controlling behavior.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about that. In terms of the isolation in the early stages, does that manifest itself even just as, not wanting your partner to see their friends,
Yeah.
people who are in their wedding, how does it typically start, sort of those earlier?
Well, and a lot of times, a lot of these tactics, especially early on, can be packaged in really nice, almost what people could perceive as romantic ways. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of community education in high schools. And every time for almost 20 years, one of the first things that young girls, still in high school, young women, will say about jealousy is, well, that's how you can tell a guy really likes you. If he's jealous, he doesn't want you spending as much time with your friends, not because he doesn't want you to have friends, but he just wants to be with you all the time. And that should really be a red flag. So any relationship should be built on trust. And I understand that when you're early in high school, we are just learning about relationships and sort of trying some of that out, which is why it's the most important time to understand from a very young age that that's not what love looks like.
So do you offer classes that go into schools? How do you do that?
We do. We every year go into several high schools throughout the St. Louis city and county and surrounding areas to talk about domestic violence, about healthy relationships, about things that are important to think about in a relationship before you get too far into it. So knowing what your expectations are, knowing what your particular boundaries are, and having a plan for how to address when those boundaries are compromised or when those expectations are not lived up to. Mm-hmm. If we wait until we're in that moment to figure out a plan, it becomes much more difficult. So we do, we encourage young women especially to, put as much time into thinking about those boundaries as they think about getting their hair done and getting their nails done and having the perfect outfit. And of course, those things are important, right? It's an important rite of passage, but also taking care of yourself emotionally, which could lead to physical protection as well.
So when families come to you, are they fleeing without a car? I mean, what is sort of the typical removal of oneself from a family once they've reached out to you? Sort of what's their journey and to get to you?
So, of course, everyone's circumstance are going to be different. A lot of times women are hesitant to bring the car, whether they have a legal right to it or not, because they cannot be sure that there's not a tracking device or some way for him to follow her movements. Same thing with cell phones, can be a blessing and a curse. It's great to have a cell phone to call for help if you need it. But if somebody is using that cell phone to track your every move, it can be really dangerous. So women, find out about us a lot of different ways. most of the time, even if, like I said, even if they have their own car, may decide not to bring it with them. And then under normal circumstances, not during a pandemic, those first 2 weeks really are part of the intake process. So that doesn't mean 2 weeks worth of paperwork or anything like that, but it means 2 weeks really of staff getting to know her and her getting to know us, and what she can expect from us. We offer a lot of support, but we are not making decisions for her. She has had somebody do that. So we really want her to feel safe enough and comfortable enough to be able to start making her own choices and making decisions about what she believes is best for her family. So that first 2 weeks will involve an opportunity for her to tell her story, and then also start to put together a goal plan for her and her family.
That's great. And tell me a little bit, I know you did a lot of work with children before you became the executive director. Tell me about sort of how the children arrive and what they've been through, or what their journey is.
Yeah, so, our mission at the shelter is to break the cycle of violence. And I really believe that we have the best chance in doing that in working with those youngest kids. So children have experienced things that most of us could not even imagine. Some children will blame themselves. Some children will blame mom, because it's not safe to blame dad. If you blame dad, if you get angry at dad, there are consequences to pay for that. So they don't understand maybe why mom left. They don't understand why she stayed. It can be a really difficult time. So we are constantly working with children, if every interaction that we have with them, to one, be building up their self-confidence and their self-esteem, and reminding them that no matter what happened or what was said, none of the violence was their fault. All children over the age of 4 will also be in twice weekly support groups. So we're talking about feelings, we're developing safety plans with children. We are teaching them how to identify their feelings, in the hopes that by identifying their feelings, they can come up with new ways to manage those feelings and not resort to violence as an only way to communicate.
So do you have any, I assume there's data out there that people who commit domestic abuse were abused, or in an abusive home as a child. Is there data around that?
Yeah, so I think we want to be really careful to, it's a complicating factor, but it's not a cause. So
Okay.
I have worked with just as many children who, because they have other resources, because they have a support system, because while they were learning violence in the home, they also learned that mom left and that there were other resources. And for them, they will never make that choice to use violence because they remember how it felt.
Right.
So there are many different factors that go into that. But we can't ignore the impact either, that if a child is being taught that violence is okay and that this is what a relationship looks like, then that's what they're learning.
Right.
And until they learn other ways, they're not going to make other choices. So to me, it's that saying of, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
And that is our job in children's program, is to make sure the children know better and have the opportunity to make different choices.
Great. Where do you see gun violence playing a role in what these women are going through? Is there a correlation? Is it prevalent? What is your experience with that?
So more than half of the women murdered by guns in the United States are killed by an intimate partner. And the same is true for children. So there are more than 1,700 children and teenagers that are killed, murdered by guns every year. And I think most people are going to assume that that is gang violence or drug violence or violence on the streets or whatever it might be. But for children under the age of 13, the number one reason is violence in the home. So they were killed maybe when mom was killed, maybe a mass shooting that we know is often has some sort of factor of domestic violence, and the children are also injured. So we have to have common sense gun laws, right? I mean, we have to hold people accountable. If people want to have guns, have your guns, be safe with them. But people who commit felonies and people who have orders of protection against them, we have to be really careful
They're
on
not
how we're holding those people. That's
I
not a
feel like,
common
we
sense
need
gun
to
law.
make sure that we're protecting the gun rights for people who are law-abiding citizens.
Correct.
And, we need to make sure that we are protecting law-abiding citizens from those who have guns who are not. So I do think common sense laws, red flag laws, are important. I've heard some Second Amendment folks, and I know they don't speak for everybody, but basically say the only legislation they would accept is increased incarceration. And by that time, there's a lot of people who have been victims or murdered. So, and especially domestic partnerships, women and men killed by their partners and children. So I guess I'd like to ask you to sort of let us know, do you see a success rate? Do you see women empowered when they leave your system? What do you feel is the outcome of the services that you're providing?
So absolutely 100% I see a difference. Now, 20 years ago, if you would have asked me to define success, in my, I was naive and much younger at that point, and I would have, said, if she leaves shelter and never returns to him and never sees him again, or, whatever that might be. But I have seen so many women in my 20 years who maybe have been in shelter 3 or 4 times, because we know that leaving is a process. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And there are lots of reasons why women don't leave, and there's lots of reasons why they return. And a lot of times those reasons are for safety for themselves and safety for their children. So for me, success is maybe a woman leaves shelter and eventually returns to that abusive person or finds herself in a different violent relationship. But she has a few more resources, and she knows that we are out there and that we are not going to judge her, and that she is welcome to come back. Or maybe it's the woman who 10 years after she leaves shelter, opens up her own hair salon and offers free haircuts and services to women in shelter because she realized, what an important gift that might be. And I could go on and on, but I absolutely believe that our program is making a difference every day in the lives of the women and children that we serve and the entire community. Because when women and children are safe, we also have a safer community.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I guess I want one last question. Do you have a general statistic or data that you can tell us about where the women who come into your shelter are coming from? What communities? Is it from outside the county? Is it inside the county? Is it inside the city? Where do most of your particular clients? I know there are shelters all over the place.
Sure.
Who does St. Martha's Hall serve primarily in terms of the community?
So we see both. We see city, we see county, we see surrounding counties, we see out of state. We have no residency requirements. I will mention that while women that we see in shelter might be women that have fewer resources, so they don't have, a credit card to go stay in a hotel for a week, or maybe they don't have family who's living in a situation where they can go stay. That in no way implies that all women who are experiencing domestic violence are doing so because they're living in poverty or because they don't have resources. So the calls that we get on our crisis line are from every zip code, are from every region, every part of the county. It is absolutely an equal opportunity employer, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Well, I really thank you for providing that service to our community. It sounds like there are people who are traveling a long way to have an opportunity to start over. And for those who are close by and closer to home, you know, a lot of us know someone who has fallen into a relationship like that and has watched a little bit of that trajectory of isolation and hopefully at some point reaching out for help. So I really thank you for being there. It's nice to meet you. I know I met
Thank
you
you.
in a parking lot giving you
Right.
giving you mittens in an undisclosed location.
Right, right.
It's nice to hear from you, to hear more about what you do, and I really appreciate you, your service. And I hope everybody will learn more about St. Martha's Hall, what they do. I know sometimes that you guys have drives for things like clothing or paper towels, things like that. We can always help each other. I know this is a tough time for everybody, but it's even tougher for those with fewer resources or who are living in you know, difficult situations.
Mhm.
So those of us who are lucky enough to be working from home and socially distancing, let's not forget all those other people who don't have the same resources we do. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being here. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope Facebook did this well and Zoom worked well together. I'll find out after the fact. And thanks everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you.
I'll share my screen to wrap up, and I'll see you guys next week with more. We're going to have Dr. Kenneth Boehm, who's going to talk to us about his experience working in the VA and the court system with mental health issues. And we're also going to hear from Circle of Concern. And we may also have a registered nurse joining us to talk about the best way to think about gloves and masks in this particular time. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you soon.